In this series, we have looked at the most popular Avalon Hill games in 1975, 1980, and 1985. In this video, we fast forward another 5 years to 1990 to see how games and opinions about those games have evolved, and find out what games were on the Avalon Hill HOTNESS list that year. This is Legendary Tactics. The 90s are now underway, and you can see a real evolution in the general magazine, let alone the games themselves. The issues are longer and have developed a nice, crisp, professional look over the years, and this goes for the HOTNESS lists as well. By 1990, they had altered the format once again, this time only slightly. Once again, they ranked the games by overall value and looked at things like components, complexity, completeness, playability, and authenticity. Game length had been reduced to a single stat again, instead of shortest and longest games. There's the year of release, and the game type, be it 2-player, multiplayer, or solitaire. Once again, it also includes the sample base upon which the ratings are based, which are notably a lot smaller than they were 5 years previously, typically only having anywhere from 50 to 200 people rating the individual games. And thankfully, they've written out the game names in full again and discontinued the acronyms they had used before. So what does the list of the hottest games look like in 1990? Number 10 is TAC Air, which has an overall value of 2.38. TAC Air looks at a theoretical set of battles between NATO and the Warsaw Pact in Germany, using the modern weaponry and tactics of the 80s. It is notable for its gameplay involving air power. The ratings are pretty good, with the best being components at 2.39. The complexity of 5.02 makes it stand out a little bit in the top 10. Games take about 5.5 hours to complete. At number 9, we have Britannia, with a pretty decent improvement in overall value over TAC Air at 2.31. This board game allows players to rewrite the history of Britain, as the game spans 1,000 years between the Roman occupation and the invasion by the Normans. The Angles, Saxons, Picts, Norsemen, Scots, Irish, and other tribes are all present and accounted for in telling this story. Interestingly, the ratings overall are worse than TAC Air, with the exception that the playability rating is quite good at 2.07. However, authenticity suffers at 3.52. Game length is still substantial at 4 hours or so. Next up at number 8, we have Kremlin, a lighter take on a dark topic. This is a board game of political intrigue in the Soviet Politburo. Players choose to influence politicians and do things like accuse others of espionage. Politicians can suffer being purged and exiled or rejoice at being pardoned, and players basically attempt to reshuffle the Politburo in a way that gives them victory while battling the aging and stress that the system wreaks on the politicians. This game is only a slight improvement over Britannia at 2.28. Its standout rating is playability at 1.81, but to balance that out, it also suffers from a lack of authenticity at 5.24. Game length comes in at a reasonable 2 hours, which is pretty good for a multiplayer game of this nature. Then after that, we have the Russian Front. The Russian Front covers the War in the East from 1941 to 1944 and sports a unique combat system, blitz attacks, and even air and sea units, which is unique for a game about the Eastern Front in World War II. It's still rated quite well with an overall value at 2.12, a substantial bump up from Kremlin. This game was one of the definitive treatments of the German invasion of the Soviet Union in World War II. All its stats are pretty solid, being in the 2s, although the game length is hefty at over 6 hours. Then we have Up Front, whose overall value at 2.11 is only a marginal improvement on the Russian Front. The game abstracts World War II conflict at the squad level to the point where it does away with a map board and introduces concepts like the relative range of units. Interestingly, the playability rating is worse than it was 5 years ago, and the average authenticity rating at 3.56 is surprising. Otherwise, it is rated quite well, with games coming in at around an hour and a half on average. We now begin the top 5 with Empires in Arms, with another marginal increase in overall value over Up Front at 2.08. Empires in Arms is a grand strategy game in the Napoleonic era, which works in elements of diplomacy, including alliances and peace treaties, where your nation's survival and prestige are all that matters. The complexity here has taken quite a jump at 8.08, and the playability isn't great at 3.84. However, the authenticity is rated to be quite good at 2.11. Where it gets a little bit crazy is that the game length is rated at 26 hours, easily the longest of any game on the list. Pacific War is the only other game that comes close at around 20 hours. Officially, the campaign is estimated to last 100 or more hours according to the box. At number 4 we have Flat Top, with an excellent rating and overall value at 2.00. It's a complex two-player game that pits the US versus the Japanese in the Pacific theater of the Second World War. It depicts the back and forth of searches for the enemy and the air and surface combat that characterized the aircraft carrier warfare of that time and place. It rates the highest in authenticity on the entire list of games at 1.76. Its ratings in completeness at 3.12 and playability at 3.56 aren't great, and games come in at around 7 hours. Number 3 is Civilization, the first with an overall value in the ones at 1.97. This game takes players back to the time of ancient civilizations, beginning around the time of the invention of agriculture, all the way to the emergence of Rome. Players lead a nation in the Mediterranean and Near East to not only conquer territory, but to develop their culture, economy, and resources. It's widely thought to be the first game that used the concept of a tech tree, where items and abilities are unlocked when a side's technology has advanced to a certain level. It has some great ratings, including completeness at 2.03 and playability at 1.72. Its authenticity suffers a bit at 4.09. Games last about 5.5 hours. Number 2 is 1830 Railways and Robber Barons, with a notable improvement in overall value over Civilization at 1.85. 1830 is a famous game of the 18XX variety. There are no elements of chance. Players buy and sell stock and work to develop the rail system across the eastern United States. Its rating for authenticity isn't amazing at 3.20, but its components at 2.00 and playability at 2.04 help it to shine at the number 2 position. Its average game length of 4 hours feels quite refreshing in comparison to most of the games on this list. And now for the number 1 game of 1990. Can you guess what it is? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. As many of you might have predicted, Advanced Squad Leader is number 1 with an overall value at 1.8. This game took the Squad Leader system with all its gamettes and consolidated everything together into a complex but compelling beast of a game that allows players to recreate squad-level combat in any theater of World War II. The playability of this game suffers at 3.44, possibly because the complexity is rated at 9.25, but everything else is rated amazingly well. The game length at 5.5 hours doesn't seem that bad for a game of this quality. As usual, we'll take a look at the worst rated games on the list as well. Once again, the introductory wargame Tactics 2 is the worst rated game of 1990. It is an abstract wargame that accomplishes what it had originally set out to do, which is to give players an introductory experience to wargaming. In this fictional war between two countries, red and blue, battles are fought with various military units across various terrain like roads, rivers, woods, mountains, beaches, and cities. It has an overall value of 5.88 with very dubious ratings of 6.22 for components and 6.80 for authenticity. It scores quite well in playability at 2.96, possibly because of its complexity rating of 1.52. For such a simple game, the play length is a bit surprising at a little over 2 hours. Luftwaffe is again towards the bottom. This game recreates the air war over Germany from 1943 to 1945, where the Allied forces are attempting to bomb important targets within Germany, and the German Luftwaffe is attempting to stop them. It is not so highly rated, being third last on the list with an overall rating of 4.80. Its ratings are in the 4s, with the exception of authenticity at 5.33. There are two newcomers to the bottom of the barrel. The first is Mosby's Raiders, Guerrilla Warfare in the Civil War. This is a solo game that puts you in command of the partisan Rangers, attempting to infiltrate enemy lines to disrupt the war effort of the Union. As you become more successful, your notoriety grows and the Union will increase its efforts to stop you. It has an overall rating of 4.53 with all the other ratings in the mid-4s except Authenticity at 5.13. There weren't as many games that could be played solitaire back then, so it's a shame to see it not rated as well. The other one at the bottom is NATO, The Next War in Europe. This is a game that is technically by Victory Games, which is a subsidiary of Avalon Hill. Like TAC Air, it looks at a hypothetical conflict between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, focusing on Central Europe on a single map sheet. The rating for overall value is 4.96. The best rating it has is for its components at 4.16, and otherwise everything else is in the high 4s or low 5s. Not only that, but a game took almost 6 hours to play, in spite of the 2-hour playtime written on the box. And that's the way things looked on the Avalon Hill Hotness list in 1990. If you want to see the coverage of the Hotness lists to this point, I will put the links in the description below. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe down below. This is Legendary Tactics.